So this evening our talk is called Icons and Baloney Detectors, Exposing Evolution's Fraud. Now you might say, icons, baloney, what's he talking about? You'll find out as we get there. Oh, and another little quick disclaimer. I just finished dinner a little bit ago, but I'm at the tail end of working my way through a juniper tree pollen allergy thingy, scratchy throat type of thing. So if I have to pause for a little bit to wash this down, bear with me on that. Okay. So, how to recognize and dismantle the flaws of arguments commonly used by evolutionists. We take the position that the Bible is true. Therefore, if you hear or see or read or encounter something that runs against what the Bible says, we believe intuitively that therefore it is wrong. If the Bible is true and something says differently, then it's a lie. Okay, if it is a lie, then there has to be misuses of argument to push the lie, to make it sound believable. Okay, if I told you that the moon was made out of green cheese, you wouldn't believe me because your senses tell you when you look at it, it's like, well, it's not even green, so how could it be made of cheese? And how would we get a dairy cow up there to make the cheese and everything else? Okay, it's silly. Okay, well, the arguments for evolution are couched in very sophisticated and scientific sounding terms, but we're going to see that a lot of what they've used, in fact essentially all of it, has to be based on a lie. So how can we spot the lie? Okay, is there a way to spot the lie? Or do we just have to say, well, the professor said and the preacher said? And we're going to see tonight that you can have a very good reason to have faith. It doesn't have to be a blind faith. So I like to give a little outline for most of my talks. I'll give an introduction, some acknowledgments, and then talk about the purpose of this talk. For the overview, we're going to look at a little exercise I call examining the evidence. Then we're going to actually go in and look at what are the icons of evolution. Then I want to do a little quick exercise on understanding critical thinking. Then I'm going to give you 13 fallacies to watch for, 13 misuses of logic or argument that are commonly used in the evolutionary propaganda world. And then we'll do our own baloney detecting to see if we can spot some of those fallacies. Then we'll have a little bit of review and some conclusions. And this is me, Michael J. Calcano, rhymes with volcano. I was born August 10, 1955 at Good Samaritan Hospital in PDX, Portland, Oregon. There's an abstract of my birth certificate, just in case there's a skeptic out there. Okay, I have the proof. All right. I want to give a special acknowledgement to this person here, Dr. Jonathan Wells. He wrote the book, Icons of Evolution. So the first half of this talk will be basically a book review of his book. Another special acknowledgement is to this man here, Mike Riddle. He is a speaker, formerly with Answers in Genesis. Now he kind of does his own thing. He still does presentations for them, but he's not on their full-time staff. He gave a PowerPoint presentation years ago that was the inspiration for the second half of this talk. And then after that, I ran into a video by this man here, Dr. Jason Lyle, who used to be with Answers in Genesis and now is with the Institute for Creation Research. And he has this excellent book and video about irrefutable proofs for creation. And his ability to logically dissect and analyze the interaction for what it takes to understand, to even be able to understand science, you need to have a Christian world viewpoint. Because if everything is random, then how can we even trust our own thoughts? How can we expect the universe to obey certain laws? How can we say that water boils at 212 degrees? Well, how do we know that? Maybe tomorrow it'll boil at 312. Okay, but the universe operates on fixed laws and principles, which only makes sense if a creator God put that into place. If everything is random, then tomorrow it could be something different. Or maybe it applies on Tuesdays and not Thursdays. We want the Bible to be the foundation for our thinking in every area. And this picture illustrates, we put the Bible as our starting point. We accept that by faith, but again, it's a reasoned faith, because the more we exercise that faith, the more we have reason to put our faith in the Bible. Then we start that as our viewpoint, so then we use that as a filter. When things come our way, we say, I don't think that squares up right. Then we can be suspicious, we can turn on our baloney detectors, and we can say, nope, I'm going to stick with God's Word. Or you can choose to stick with the other. Jason Lyle says, not everybody is persuaded by a good argument, and some people are persuaded by bad arguments. So we owe it to ourselves to make the best logical, rational decision we can, looking at all of the evidence. And as Pete alluded to earlier, a lot of this evidence you're going to hear tonight is being suppressed or misrepresented. All right, examining the evidence. How does a scientist or anybody here or anywhere examine evidence? Okay, well, you say, well, we'll use our senses, right? Sight, smell, touch, hearing. But everybody has a starting point for their thinking. Okay, you have to have some prior knowledge to bring to the new knowledge to be able to integrate it into whatever it is you're learning about. So you can call that starting point a bias, or faith, or presupposition, or a paradigm, or take a drink, or an axiom, or a worldview. Oftentimes we refer to the worldview as a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview. But for simplicity's sake, I will borrow the term bias because that's where I heard it from. What are our bias options? Well, basically we have two. Our bias options that we can bring to scientific evidence is either the Bible is true, or what would be the other? Bible is not true. You really have to bring one of these two together. Now, the scientific community would have you believe that, oh no, scientists are objective. We don't go in with any preconceived view. That's baloney. Everybody has a basis for understanding the world around them. Okay? So if your view that the Bible is true or not true, it will affect the outcome of what you observe. So let's say we have evidence. It could be the Grand Canyon, it could be fossils, it could be something in biology, astronomy, geology, zoology, oceanography, any branch of science. And we look at that evidence. The person who believes that the Bible is true would look at that evidence, and because he believes the Bible is true, would understand that what he sees shows evidence of a creative intelligence, namely God, and a worldwide flood. Those two things. The person over here on the other side who believes that the Bible is not true would look at that very same piece of evidence, but because of their pre-existing worldview say, no, I think that this shows random processes acting over long periods of time. Two people, two different starting points, the same evidence, but you reach two different conclusions because everybody brings a starting point to their observation. Evidence never speaks for itself. It always has to be interpreted by the observer. And everyone, including scientists, have a bias for their thinking. The question we have to ask ourselves is, does it agree with reality? Are the conclusions that we reach supported by our observations of the real world? Or do we just believe that the moon is made of green cheese? Because either everything was created, or what's the other alternative? Everything created itself. Now I'm just going to give you 3 seconds to ponder that. Okay? There's no in between here. Either somebody created everything because everything that means that everything has a purpose, or everything happened randomly, which means there's no purpose to life anyway, and we shouldn't even spend our time sitting here, but we're here anyway, because we all believe that there's got to be a purpose to life. There are no other options, people. Okay? So we're settling into that idea. I'm going to read you this quote here. Let me clear my throat here. All right. The scientist enters into a study with certain preconceived notions and interprets the results of the study with the same preconceived notions. True objectivity simply does not exist in the scientific world. Now you're thinking, well, who wrote this? You'll find out. A creationist and an evolutionist can agree on the data, the physically observable phenomena, whether it be the distribution of radioisotopes in a given geological structure, or the bone formations of a living animal or fossil. They will then proceed to interpret that data according to their own presuppositions. God created this, or it all happened by accident. Both employ the same data, but reach strikingly different conclusions. Notice the terms preconceived notions, according to their presuppositions. True objectivity simply does not exist in the scientific world. This is by an evolutionist, Donald Calbraith, in The Challenge of Creationism, another point of view from the journal American Laboratory. Exposing the fraud. Here we go. In the Bible, book of Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 11 says, "Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them." That is what we're doing here tonight, is to expose how the fraud, the lie of evolution is pushed on a society. Well, you might ask, just what evidence is used to support the belief in or teaching of evolutionism? That's where we bring in this book, The Icons of Evolution by Jonathan Wells. There is also a video that was produced by Coldwater Media, which basically goes through the outline of the book as it follows a true case study of a high school science teacher in Washington State who he didn't bring creation into his public school science classroom, but he would bring in articles from mainstream scientific journals that brought evolution into question. And a parent decided, oh, this sounds religious to me. So he right away, didn't talk to the teacher, didn't talk to the teacher's principal, called the superintendent and called the lawyer who contacted the ACLU. And it follows the drama that this poor guy had to endure. More on that some other time. All right. If I'm not talking too much, I'm doing okay. But not talking too much has never been my problem, I don't think. Anyway, so number one, the Miller-Urey experiment. If these terms don't make any sense to you, we'll go through them, don't worry about that. The Darwin's Tree of Life, homology invertebrate limbs, Haeckel's embryos, Haeckel was a guy, Archaeopteryx, the missing link, you may have heard of Archaeopteryx, the peppered moths, Darwin's finches, four-winged fruit flies, the evolution of the horse, and ape to human, the ultimate icon. So, this is our book review. Let's get started. The Miller-Urey experiment was conducted in the year 1953 by Stanley Miller under the supervision of his professor Harold Urey. There was a mixture of methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor to simulate the supposed version of Earth's primitive reducing atmosphere. The products were allowed to condense and collect in a trap which modeled a body of water on the Earth's surface. The primeval soup type of thing, right? After about a week of operation, a dark brown scum had collected in the trap which contained several types of amino acids, including glycine and alanine, together with sugars, tars, and various other unidentified organic chemicals. So far, so good. So, because they collected a couple of amino acids, they say, aha, we've proven life in the test tube. Not so fast. Here are the problems associated with this experiment. Geologists have concluded that Earth's oldest rocks reveal that oxygen was present during their formation. Now, we said this was a reducing atmosphere. And if there's oxygen present, the presence of oxygen will break down organic compounds, proteins, and stuff like that. So, if you have oxygen, you can't have life. But if you don't have oxygen, you can't have life either, because once you create that cell, it needs to live on something. So you have a kind of a chicken and egg problem there. Nature would not have provided a trap to contain the compounds that were produced. Only a few amino acids were produced, not the 20 essential for life. And the amino acids that created were both left-handed and right-handed. And all living tissues use only left-handed amino acids. The chemical structure is the same, but they can form in a left-handed or right-handed version. Okay? So while I can put my hands together like this, I can't overlay them like this. Okay? And all living tissue use only left-handed. So you're going to get a mixture of 50-50 in any random event. Well, as soon as you try to mix one right-handed with the left-handed, you have death. So they didn't create life in the test tube, they created death in the test tube. And besides that, proteins cannot self-assemble without the DNA molecule to give them the assembly instructions on how to do all that. Not to mention the tars that they found were also toxic and everything else. So it was a pretty bad mess. Okay. However, illustrations like this are found in this textbook, which was printed in 2006, only 10 years ago. It's probably out there some more. I haven't had a chance lately to go out there and find the science textbooks and update that. But if you were to go to Google and go to images and type in Miller-Urey, you'll get a whole page showing you all these different websites and all these different references where they still put this out there as proof for evolution. Even though smart, sincere biologists say, this can't happen, this doesn't prove a thing. But they put it out there to show that the lie still exists. All right, that's one down. Darwin's Tree of Life. You've heard about Charles Darwin. It was in the year 1859 that he published his book on the origin of species. And Darwin's Tree of Life, the sophisticated version looks like this, okay? Sometime, way back when, there was this one-celled animal that eventually split off and became vertebrates, which eventually became mammals, which eventually became man up here. Darwin's tree of life is refuted by what's known as the Cambrian explosion. When you've probably all heard about these columns where they have, you all know about Jurassic Park and some of this type of thing, and then you have these other different millions of years ago sequences. Cambrian life is where the first fossils are found. In that first layer, okay, are all these different structural forms. They're all appear suddenly. There's no evidence that you had like a worm that slowly started developing a spine, which slowly developed a backbone, which slowly developed legs, nothing. Everything jumps in there and it's all ready to go. As evolutionary theorist Jeffrey Schwartz expressed it this way, the main animal groups, and he's an evolutionist, appear in the fossil record as Athena did from the head of Zeus, full-blown and raring to go. Since higher levels of the biological hierarchy appear first, one could even say that the Cambrian explosion stands Darwin's tree of life on its head. If any botanical analogy were appropriate, it would be a lawn rather than a tree. That was Jonathan Wells speaking there. So instead of a tree branching out from a single one, what you have is a whole yard or a whole orchard of different life forms. The idea that they all trace back to a single ancestor is not supported by the evidence. Paleontologists have paid an enormous price for Darwin's argument. We fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history, yet to preserve our favorite account of evolution by natural selection, we view our data as so bad that we almost never see the very process we profess to study. The history of most fossil species includes two features inconsistent with gradualism. Gradualism being the slow, steady change of things. Those two aspects are, one, stasis. Most species exhibit no directional change during their tenure on Earth. They appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. One of the things they find in the Cambrian level is horseshoe crabs. And you go down the beach, and like in Australia, and they'll find horseshoe crabs, and they're identical to the fossils that are supposedly the oldest fossils around. So they call them living fossils. So what does it prove? It proves that things don't change all that much. And number two, their sudden appearance. In any local area, a species did not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. And this was the late Stephen Jay Gould, professor of geology and paleontology at Harvard University. He passed away several years ago. But in his day, he was the world's leading proponent of evolution. That's been taken over by Richard Dawkins. More on him later. So you can, for the camera. Okay, you can go on the internet and find Darwin Tree of Life wallpaper for your computer. You can find Darwin Tree of Life t-shirts. You can even find Darwin Tree of Life Christmas ornaments. Okay, it gets worse. We'll get back to this a little bit later. Number three, homology in vertebrate limbs. Homology means like homogenized milk, homo meaning the same, okay? Similarity in vertebrate limbs. So a human arm and a cat's forearm and a whale's flipper and a bat's wing all have similar structures in their bones. And so this is proof that we all came from a common ancestor. No. If you have a common designer, why not employ the same sort of structural, mechanical processes? Well, what does the evidence show us? The arguments for homology are based on what's known as circular reasoning. It's much the same as saying this. Common ancestry is demonstrated by homology, which demonstrates common ancestry. A better explanation would be they are analogous to each other. They have similar form and function, but again, that doesn't mean that they came from the same place. Many homologous structures actually derive from different genetic and embryonic locations. Because of microbiology now, they can get into and they can actually watch an embryo as it develops, and they can see that, wait a minute, in the whale, the flipper develops from one section of the embryo, but in a bat it develops from another, and in the chicken it develops from another. So when they really get down to the nitty-gritty of how it all starts, they're showing more and more that, hey, this doesn't hold up. It should all be coming from the same place if it's supposedly evolved from something else. Here's another quote. It must be stressed that Darwin himself never claimed to provide proof of evolution or of the origin of species. What he did claim was that if evolution has occurred, a number of otherwise inexplicable facts are readily explained. The evidence for evolution was therefore indirect. The indirect evidence for evolution is based primarily on the significance of similarities found in different organisms. The similarity of plan is easily explicable if all descended with modification from a common ancestor by evolution, and the term homologous is used to denote corresponding structures formed this way. It's kind of technical. It just means, yeah, you could explain it that way if this was true. However, in vertebrate animals, the skeleton of the forelimb is a splendid example of homology. The example is all the more telling because the bones have become modified in an adaptation to different modes of life, but have retained the same fundamental plan of structure inherited from a common ancestor. Yeah, okay, you're really trying to make your point, but and that's what the Encyclopedia Britannica says. And if you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, see, they're still using this whole thing here. And if you go to a Google and you go to images and you search for homologous structures, you see a whole page full of different examples. Okay? All it means is that the circular reasoning is that they say, well, if evolution are true, this is what we'd expect to find. So just because you find it doesn't mean evolution is true. Okay? If I said the parking lot is wet outside, if it rained, the parking lot would be wet. And I look outside and I say, the parking lot is wet. Therefore, my conclusion is it must have rained. Okay? Are there other possible explanations? Okay? That's how the logic breaks down, is they give you a false sort of reasoning to that. Haeckel's embryos. You may have seen something like this similar in a biology textbook, high school, college, otherwise. Haeckel's embryos. He drew these in 1874. Basically, he said that, look, the embryo of a fish and a salamander, a turtle, chicken, rabbit, they're all almost identical, which means that we all share these common ancestry here. Well, when photographs were actually taken of the actual embryos, this is what came out. Okay, don't look anything at all like Haeckel's drawings. It was determined in 1874 that Haeckel had added 3.5 millimeters to the head of Bischoff's dog embryo and taken 2 millimeters off the head of Ecker's human embryo, doubled the length of the human posterior, and substantially altered the details of the human eye. He sarcastically pointed out that Haeckel taught in Jena, home of the then finest optical equipment available, so he had no excuse for his inaccuracy. He concluded that anyone who engaged in such blatant fraud had forfeited all respect and that Haeckel had eliminated himself from the ranks of scientific research workers of any stature. His own university then held a hearing and basically found him guilty of fraud. However, in these different textbooks, it can still be found, Haeckel's embryos. Archaeopteryx, the missing link. This is supposedly the transition between birds and reptiles. It was discovered in 1861 in Germany. It was touted as the link. Paleontologists now agree that this is not a transitional form. It is a bird. Okay? It has some unusual features, but it is a bird nonetheless. Other fossil remains are identified as another critter called the Compsognathus, about the size of a chicken. Okay? What makes it unusual is it had these little like claw things at the end of its wings, but ostriches have the same kind of little claws on the end of their wings too. It appeared in the 1998 book Biology, and also in this other book here, was published in 1999. Peppered moths. Okay, here you've got a lighter colored tree with a dark colored moth, a darker colored tree with a lighter colored moth, and there's also a dark colored moth there that you can hardly see, of course. And the idea is, without going into a whole lot of explanation, it had to do with the Industrial Revolution and factories putting soot in the air, and the soot was making the trees darker, therefore the lighter moths were being seen by the birds and they were being eaten. Okay? And then later they cleared up the air and the trees went back to being lighter shade, and then the birds could see the darker colored moths, and then the birds would start eating the darker colored moths. And this is proof that man evolved from monkeys. Yeah. H.B. Kettlewell, who performed most of the classic experiments, said that if Darwin had seen this, he would have witnessed the consummation and confirmation of his life's work. Oh, how grand. However, several major problems here. Number one, the peppered moths do not normally light on the tree trunks. They nest in the leaves. Number two, the photo shows dead moths that were glued or pinned to the trunk. This is not their natural habitat. And the moths fly at nighttime, not during the day anyway, so the birds wouldn't have seen them anyhow. The moth's recovery rates were not within predicted norms because it didn't wipe out all of one or the other. The moths have the inherent genes to produce light and dark offspring. So for a while you have light and dark, mostly light. Then for a while you have light and dark, mostly dark. Then for a while you have light and dark, mostly light. And again, this is supposedly proof that all of us came from a pile of pond scum millions of years ago. The geographic distribution of moths was also not verified by supplemental research. So when researchers, instead of just taking this and running with it like they did for decades, when other scientists went out to replicate Kettlewell's work, they said, hey, wait a minute, this is not adding up here. However, in Miller-Levine, Prentice Hall textbook, on these 2 pages, you'll find out about this. Kenneth Miller, who's the co-author of this in books, is a professor of biology at Brown University. And he's a very also vocal evolutionist and ardent anti-creationist. All right, moving on to Darwin's finches. So when Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, he encountered all these different finches. He was a naturalist on the journey. That his job was to document some of the flora and the fauna as they were there, okay, on the HMS Beagle. And they found these different ones, and he classified them based upon several different things. But the seed eaters he put up there, and the insect eaters put down here. There was even a vegetarian one on the far end. Well, the problems with, and when Darwin saw these different finches, he thought, well, look, see, when left to themselves, look at all these different varieties of finches. They probably all start off as one variety of finch. If given enough time, this creature could turn into something else. That's a speculation. It's an extrapolation. There is no scientific proof that Darwin's finches did anything more than just change, become finches. And here's why. The initial extrapolation by evolutionists was that the increased beak sizes would be passed on to further generations. In times of drought, okay, it gets harder to get to the seeds. They're tougher seeds, so you need a bigger beak to survive. And so the birds that had the bigger beaks would get more food than the smaller ones couldn't, so they wouldn't breed as much. And it was to keep going. After a while, you'd have a toucan, right? However, when the rainy conditions returned, the average beak sizes regressed back to the previous levels. It bounced around between a range, but it never got bigger than the biggest one they had there. Besides that, several of the species interbreed. The big beaks and the small beaks can actually get together and have baby beaks with middle-sized beaks. So what does that prove? You start with birds, you wind up with birds. That's not evolution, that's birds. It's an example of extrapolation, taking off on a curve and going this way, or a fluctuation, just wavy patterns, okay, kind of like the weather. However, there was a book written in 1995. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner called The Beak of the Finch, where some people went down there and spent a couple years examining these finches, and they wrote all about it, made this glorious praise about how Darwin, really got us on the right track with looking at these birds, and it won a Pulitzer Prize, okay? But again, it's extrapolation, saying, okay, because we see the trajectory going this way, that tells us that, in a couple million years, we're going to have a whole new different species. No, it doesn't mean that at all. And there's no scientific, observable proof for that. 4-winged fruit flies are our next victim. Here's a couple different sketches. A typical fruit fly has a little tiny thing in there, but if you mutate it and hit it with gamma rays and beta rays and microwaves and everything else, eventually you can get some fruit flies to hatch out that have 4 wings. And that's evidence that, wow, look at these genetic changes. I mean, these mutations cause all kinds of different structures to appear. When common fruit flies are subjected to various conditions, genetic mutations occur as supposed proof of evolutionary change. However, there are no muscles attached to these wings. They just sit there like lame-o wings. Other flies won't mate with it. They think it's a freaky mutant. They won't even touch it. It cannot live outside the laboratory. Okay, so in the real world, if you actually had a real 4-winged fruit fly, it would just kind of limp around. It wouldn't have any survival. The extra wings don't give it a survival advantage. And besides, if nobody will breed with it, then what happens? It's the first one to die off. It shows evolution in reverse. It shows that mutations are damaging, not helpful. However, these 3 people were jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1995 for their discoveries concerning the genetic control of early embryonic development using fruit flies. Evolution of the horse. It starts over here with this thing called Eohippus, 60 million years ago, became Meohippus, became Merychippus, became Pliohippus, which became Equus, where we get our term equestrian from. This was invented by a guy named Othniel C. March in the year 1874. A few problems that exist are he picked animals from all over the world. He did not find them in one place, and he did not find them in the order shown. Modern horses are found in layers with and lower than the so-called ancient horse. Oops. Well, we better not let that news get out. People might not believe our story. The ancient horse is not a horse at all. It's called a hyrax. It's still alive today in South America. It's about the size of a fox, and it's a meat-eating animal with sharp teeth. So, fraud from the start. However, in November 2004, in National Geographic, was Darwin wrong? Well, the implication is, no, he wasn't. See? And we offer this as proof. It's also referenced in Encyclopedia Britannica as well. All right, ape to human, the ultimate icon. We don't discuss that here. I save that for my talk called The Tower of Babel and Ancient Man, which we gave a while back. So, doesn't mean you can't get it, though. It might be available. In fact, I know it is available on YouTube because church I was with up in Oregon posted it on there. So if you want more information, I can tell you more about that. Tower of Babel, Ancient Man. All right, so what does all this mean for us? We're kind of at our halfway point here.
I'm not going to hear the other part. Oh, man.
The other part?
Well, human.
Well, that's a whole, I mean, we could spend 2 or 3 hours on that one. Evolutionism is a bankrupt, or 4 or 5 or 6. Evolutionism is a bankrupt philosophy that continues to depend on outdated and even fraudulent examples to justify itself. All right, here's where media's evolutionary bias comes in. We see all these kind of things all the time. Newspaper articles, magazines, everything else, and it's all, evolution, evolution, evolution. And then, not too long ago, this came out. National Geographic magazine, where's the date on this one here? In an article called The Age of Disbelief. I'm looking for it, I don't see it on here. And I didn't bring my reading glasses. Here's what they basically did here, was they called it the war on science. They lumped climate change deniers and evolution deniers and moon landing deniers and people who are against vaccines and people who are against genetically modified foods under one big umbrella and said, look at how silly these people are. They just don't believe in science. Okay? Now, I'm not here to make specific issues, but to equate, the evidence on climate change is very controversial. The evidence on evolution is very controversial. But then to throw in and say, and these same people denied the moon landing. Well, now that's beyond bad journalism. That is beyond bad research. That is just downright slander that these people try to do this. And then they have, and then you have people who are against vaccinations. And then you have people who are against genetically modified foods. Now, some of these things, you see, they mix a little bit of good with a little bit of bad. If you want to get a rat to eat rat poison, you don't just give him bad rat poison. You mix it in with some food to get him to say, oh, look, here's food. And then the rat starts eating the food. Then he gets the poison, okay? So in this article, they talk about people who believe that there was a square Earth. And then they had pictures of the Anti-Evolution League. This is from the Scopes monkey trial. And then they ridicule the Creation Museum in Kentucky, which shows dinosaurs and man living together. For the climate change deniers, they showed these pictures of Hurricane Sandy and said, see, Hurricane Sandy was caused by global warming. There's the proof right there. No, there's no proof that Hurricane Sandy caused global warming. Then they have this cloned sheep. They talk about genetic modifications. And then they show this emotional picture of these 2 kids that are standing out in the woods. It's like, what's with their parents? What do they do? What do they do? Well, because the parents didn't want to give these kids vaccinations. And so they set them up for this photo op here and make it look like they're living some sort of destitute life because their parents are some backwoods hillbilly sort of people. And they're trying to lump all of these people who have these beliefs into the same category, which again is just patently, fraudulently bad. You don't have to have a degree in journalism to recognize bad journalism. Okay? And it's just National Geographic, so who's going to call them on it? All right. Thinking about thinking. This is the critical thinking activity. The term critical thinking means the mental process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, which means putting together, and then evaluating, making a value judgment of information to reach an answer or conclusion. To do this, you need a couple things. Some water in a plastic bottle. You need a set of cognitive skills. You need to be able to think, okay? 2, you need to have the ability and intellectual commitment to use those skills to guide your behavior, okay? Now that I know that drinking gasoline is bad, I'm not going to drink gasoline anymore, okay? Critical thinking does not include simply the acquisition and retention of information. It doesn't mean just, okay, I learned something new, okay. Or the possession of a skill set that you do not use regularly, like I know how to solder, okay, solder copper pipes, but I don't do that every day. I do it maybe once every couple of years. Nor does critical thinking merely exercise skills without accepting the results. Okay. In other words, when you apply this, you say, wow, if this has implications to my life, I have to apply it to my life. I can't just say, well, that was interesting, and kind of ignore it. All right. The purpose of critical thinking is to achieve understanding. Okay. We don't want to be dummies. None of us want to be, hey, I want to be a dummy. Okay. We use it to evaluate intellectual and or philosophical viewpoints, like the creation-evolution debate. We use it to solve problems, to make our lives easier, because who wants to work harder? And to make personal lifestyle applications. That is why evolutionists do not want true critical thinking taught in the biology classroom, because they know that the weight of the argument is on our side.
So are they doing this for your YouTube or something?
So anyway, Carl Sagan, an astronomer, helped produce the series Cosmos years ago, wrote a book called The Demon-Haunted World, and in it, he says that we need to have a baloney detector. A little bit of baloney, that's the happy dog is wagging his tail. Tuning up our baloney detector. The late astronomer and popularizer of science, Carl Sagan, worried that an epidemic of irrationality is loose in the world. While we need to protect ourselves from such false beliefs, Sagan writes in his book, is a well-equipped baloney detector kit. A baloney detector is simply a good grasp of logical reasoning and investigative procedure. Carl Sagan and I would agree about how to describe the principles of baloney detecting in general. We would disagree only about where the detector ought to be pointed, and especially about whether we should ever suspect the presence of baloney in claims made by the official scientific establishment. That was written by Dr. Philip Johnson in his book called Tuning Up Your Baloney Detector. That was actually the title of the chapter in the book Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds. All right, Carl Sagan was right. We do need baloney detectors, but we don't need to beam them on Christian beliefs, as Sagan urged. Instead, let's use them to get an honest take on the fossil record and to separate science from philosophy. And we should encourage robust debate between creationists and evolutionists. It keeps both sides from ignoring evidence that does not appear to fit their theories. But when an evolutionist calls a creationist a flat earther or a troglodyte, that doesn't really promote a good, healthy debate, right? That was by Chuck Colson in his book, Is Nature All That There Is? All right, here we go. We're going to do little samples here. And we're not going to, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just kind of quietly look at this and kind of see if you can spot it, and then I'll give you the answers, okay? So here we go. From the book Biology, Miller and Levine, 2002, Misuse of Argument. Here is their quote. Those life forms must have evolved in the absence of oxygen. And now in your head, I play the Jeopardy theme. Okay, where is the misuse of argument here? Must have evolved. Okay? They're trying to, they're just saying it as if it happened, but they really don't have any proof. Okay? Intellectual bullying from Biology, Miller and Levine, 2000. But all researchers agree on certain basic facts. We know, for example, that humans evolved from ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. All researchers agree, so if you don't, you're bad. Basic facts. Well, if you can't understand basic facts, you must be a nerd or a numbskull. And we, who's we? Yeah, Miller and Levine. All right, the appeal to emotion. This was a quote from Eugenie Scott, director of the National Center for Science Education. In my opinion, using creation and evolution as topics for critical thinking exercises in primary and secondary schools, I told you they don't like it, is virtually guaranteed to confuse students about evolution and may lead them to reject one of the major themes in science. Oh, virtually guaranteed to confuse. Well, I think let's give the kids a little bit more smarts than that, okay? Reject one of the major themes of science. What would that major theme be? That we all evolved from apes. How about Theodosius Zobansky in his Nothing in Biology Makes Sense Except in the Light of Evolution from the magazine, the journal American Biology Teacher. He says, evolution as a process that has always gone on in the history of the earth can be doubted only by those who are ignorant of the evidence or are resistant to evidence owing to emotional blocks or to plain bigotry. It's always gone on. Those doubters who are ignorant, they must have emotional blocks. Maybe they're just plain bigots. Okay. Is he trying to have a serious discussion here? No. He's trying to shut down the argument, try to get people to say, well, I don't want to be categorized in that group, so I don't want to be one of those racist, bigoted homophobes, so I guess I'll just kind of go along to get along. Arguing from the assumed premise. Artist's depiction of an Australopithecine family. Oh, you're looking down here, but really, it's depiction. He took artistic license to draw this Australopithecine family. Prednisol, science, misuse of argument. An animal dies and sinks into shallow water. Any of you ever had a goldfish before? Forgot to feed it or change the water? When it died, what happened? Yeah, it didn't float. It floated and bloated. It didn't die and sink. Okay. Fossils, in the Great Plains, we have historical evidence that there were millions of bison roaming around. Okay? How many of them became fossils? About 0. Why? What happened? They were shot. Their carcasses were left out there on the prairie. Okay? But they weren't buried. Okay? An animal has to be buried quickly in mud because you can't have just dirt because you can't let oxygen get to it because the bacteria then will decompose any organic material. You'll be left with nothing. Okay? A shallow grave for your kitty cat or your frog or your hamster, if you were to go back out in 2 or 3 years, there wouldn't be much left in the ground. It'd be all pretty much compost. Okay? But if it's buried rapidly under mud, okay, that seals out the oxygen, seals out the bacteria, you can get fossil preservation in just a couple of years. Appeal to emotion. Undermine the study of science threatens Texas children's ability to compete for jobs and the state's ability to compete for business. If we teach our kids creation, we're going to go broke. Oh, my goodness. Undermine the study of science. What's that implicit in? No, we want to teach kids how to look at the evidence and make reasonable conclusions based on all the evidence, not just a little smattering of hand-picked evidence that seems to support one side and not the other. Arguing from the assumed premise. As for the claim that evolution is an unproven theory, that's nonsense. Evolution is a fact, established with the same degree of confidence as our theory of disease and the atomic theory of matter. Yes, there is lively debate about the particular evolutionary mechanisms that cause particular changes, but the existence of evolutionary changes is not in doubt. Our own bodies provide walking evidence. Well, we're here, so it must have happened. Stating that evolution is a fact? Yeah, well, there might be another explanation. All right. Told you we'd get back to this guy, Richard Dawkins. I didn't put a category into this one. I'll let you decide for yourself what this falls under. You ready? From the book, The God Delusion. I gotta get ready for this one. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
Baloney?
All of the above on steroids. Okay? Richard Dawkins is saying this about God. He's going to have to answer for this on Judgment Day. You know. Does he have a bias? Kind of hard not to find it there. Colossians 2 verse 8 says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." Verse 11, "So that no advantage would be taken of us by Satan, For we are not ignorant of his schemes. His scheme is to turn people away from God by having them believe that the Bible is irrelevant, not trustworthy, not something you can put your faith into. Okay? What we hope to show you today is that all of those arguments against the Bible are built on fallacy. They're built on lies, distortions, exaggerations, half-truths, mistruths, and sometimes just plain hostility to God. We make the Bible the foundation for our thinking in every area. We can approach things with a clear mind. What does all this mean for us? The philosophy of the philosophy of evolution teaches that man, independent of divine revelation, in other words, without a message from God, and this is where it gets critical, determines for himself what is truth. Okay? Evolution teaches that man can figure it out all on his own, and that man doesn't need God. Okay? Here's a graphic to illustrate that. If God created you, then Adam is in your past, then absolutes like morality come from God, and God sets the rules. However, if ape is in your past, morality is relative, and man can set the rules, and you can act like an ape all you want. So what does all this mean for us? Jeremiah 51:15. He, being God, hath made the earth by his power, he hath established the world by his wisdom, and he hath stretched out the heaven by his understanding. This verse is emphasizing his power, his wisdom, and his understanding, which is far above your power and your wisdom and your understanding and my power and my wisdom and my understanding. I'm going to go with him. If I have to choose between throwing in with Dawkins or throwing in with God, I'm throwing in with God. Colossians 1:16. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. Verse 17, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the ultimate. Now, excuse me, you won't win people to a saving knowledge of Christ by simply sharing facts about a literal six-day creation. Okay, that's not enough to win somebody to Christ. But if their barrier to Christ is that they believe that the Bible is irrelevant, then you can show them that the Bible can be trusted, which then leads them to the next step, which is accepting God as their Savior. I want to get back to this evolutionary tree thing for a minute. In conclusion, because we've been 1 hour. I told you about the T-shirts.
An hour and a half, so you're okay.
Oh, yeah, well, I got time for questions. We talked about screensavers and wallpapers and Christmas tree ornaments and stuff like this. It goes even beyond that now. This was the actual sketch. In fact, this is in his book on the origin of species. This is the only sketch or illustration in the entire book, was this sketch of here, which is his tree of life, okay? Starts down here and then becomes everything else, right? There is one other aspect to the illustration that I'm going to show you now. It is the words, I think. This is what Darwin's proposal was. He thought that I could imagine all of life coming from this way. He never provided an example of the origin of species, okay? He just talked about different types of species, okay? But he never got around to addressing this issue down here. Now, this illustration. There are people, okay, smart people, okay, intelligent people, graduate students at universities getting advanced degrees. And one of the trends that they're doing now when they get their degree is to go out and have Darwin's Tree of Life tattooed on themselves. Now, I'm not here to diss on anybody who has a tattoo, okay? That's not the point. The point is, they believe so much in this, and they've spent so much money for their education. Now they're going to go out and make it a part of their skin. If they ever do change their mind, they're going to have some serious splaining to do someday. Okay. Again, we're not here to take issue with anybody with tattoos, okay? But, you know, you ready to commit to advertising this? Okay? you have really bought into it, okay? And I hope these people reach a point where they decide, wow, that was a silly thing to do in my earlier years. John 17:3. And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Jeremiah 29:13 says, and you shall seek me and shall find me when you shall search for me with all your heart. If you're going to go look for God, okay, he just expects you to come to him with sincerity. Say, God, if you're really real, if your word's really real, can you please reveal that to me? Please show me. And when you pray that prayer, God will move. He will answer you, because he's not going to. He wants to have a relationship with you. He wants to have you saved eternally. He's not out to get you messed up. All right. Next up, I left question marks because I'm not sure what we're going to do next time I come back. I've given most of my talks already, but we've got some great videos lined up, and we're going to have some more too. So we wrap it up, and we have questions and answers. Okay.